Yo, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Yinzer on Hockey. Before we begin, make sure you go down below, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, make sure you click that little bell so you stay up to date on all the off-season happenings. So today we're going to discuss what are realistic goals for each team. What is the dream scenario for each team in the NHL? We're going to go ahead and do these in alphabetical order. Let's begin with Anaheim. Anaheim needs to get the best out of Corey Perry and Ryan Getzlaf. Their time is limited, and they need to get the best out of this core. And for them, they need to go deep in the playoffs to consider this a successful year, possibly even get a championship for this core. Arizona, get the best out of your young players. Alex Galchenyuk, the recent trade acquisition, have a big year for him. The Oliver Ekman-Larsson extension, make sure that you prove that worthwhile, and be a contender. I'm not saying a cup contender, but be a contender for a playoff spot. That would be a very, very successful year for Arizona and could possibly reinvigorate that fan base. Boston, get a top four defenseman in Boston is going to be one of their big goals, and possibly add a scoring winger to replace some of the loss from the two Nashes, Riley and Rick, to be able to add some of that scoring back in your lineup. And for Boston, a successful season for them is obviously going to end in a Stanley Cup. Buffalo, get an immediate impact from Rasmus Dahlin. He's the number one draft pick. Everybody has gushed over this guy. He is a generational type talent, is the quote everybody is using. Get that impact immediately from him and jump up in the standings. Buffalo doesn't have to win the division, doesn't have to be in the playoffs for this to be successful, but steady improvement, and by that I mean getting out of the Atlantic Division cellar. Calgary, add some scoring. They lacked front-end talent last year. They lacked front-end scoring, I guess you would say. And for them, adding some scoring and getting back to the playoffs, Calgary is a team that should be in the general conversation for playoff contention each year, and I think Calgary has the potential to get back to the playoffs, and I think that would be a successful year for them. Carolina, get fair return on the trades that are being speculated. I don't know if they are true rumors or not, or what the franchise is doing as far as what it goes internally, but if you are shopping Jeff Skinner, if you are shopping Justin Falk and Noah Hannafin, make sure you get value on that trade and get the pieces back to still be competitive while making these trades. And I think if they do that, there's a realistic chance that Carolina could be in the playoff conversation. Chicago, get back a healthy Corey Crawford. A healthy Corey Crawford is a Vezina caliber goaltender and a Conn Smythe caliber goaltender in the playoffs. So getting back a healthy Corey Crawford immediately puts Chicago back in that top tier of Western Conference teams, right back fighting for deep playoff positioning and whatnot. And I think that's realistic for Chicago. Colorado, prove that this year was not a fluke. That's your goal. Don't revert back to last year's Colorado. Be this year's Colorado again next year, but better. Add some more punch to your lineup, but don't take away from the youth in the core that you have in place right now. And then make some noise in the playoffs. I think that's going to be Colorado's goal this year, is not just to get to the playoffs again, but to make some noise. Get possibly into the second or third round. That's realistic. Columbus, improve on special teams. That's got to be your big takeaway in this offseason. Get better on the penalty kill, better on the power play. They were a bottom 10 franchise in both categories. So improving on the penalty kill and the power play, and win a playoff series. The ultimate goal for Columbus this year is winning a playoff series. For Dallas, Dallas's goal or Dallas's plan has to be to let Jim Montgomery coach this team. Get the players to buy into the system. Get your front office to support his system. Get him players that fit his system, and let him coach that team. And then playoff success, getting back into the playoffs, would be a minimalist expectation of Dallas. Um, Detroit Detroit needs to try and get out from under the cap situation they're in. Obviously, they've been up against the cap since 2008, 2009. It seems like when their last deep playoff run. Um, so get some of these heavy contracts moved out, and if you're able to move some of these contracts out and possibly make a move for some of the bigger free agents out there and get Detroit back to um, their former fame. Edmonton, the big thing for Edmonton this year is to improve the defense and the goaltending, and obviously a successful season for them will be getting back to the playoffs. Florida, um, Florida just needs to let their youth continue to develop, but maybe add a veteran scorer, a veteran goal scorer, and somebody that can help the locker room scenario, help with the managing the locker room. And a guy like that, and Florida's ultimate goal this year will be to get back into the playoffs. You got Roberto Luongo, the defense is very good. Everything's in place for them to be a playoff contender. So getting into the playoffs will be a realistic goal for Florida. Um, for Los Angeles, every Kings fan in the world will tell you they need somebody that can score goals. That's what they're going to be looking to do this offseason. They will be tied to every goal-scoring free agent out there. JVR, James Neal, Ilya Kovalchuk, all those guys will be tied to Los Angeles in some way, shape, or form. So, and if they're able to add that scoring punch, then they're going to be able to make a run in the playoffs. Minnesota, they getting back a healthy Ryan Suter, Zach Parise is going to be the ultimate prize for them, and maybe get some other relief, move some contracts around in other areas to help supplement these guys, and try and have some playoff success that maybe gets rid of the historical failures of Minnesota's yesteryear. Montreal just needs to find a true center iceman, not a winger that would like to play at center, or maybe a defenseman that we're going to put into the center ice position for whatever reason other than we're Montreal and we can, I guess. But find a true center iceman, and I think realistic expectations for them, or, I mean, the most likely, the best scenario for them would be to get back to the playoffs. Nashville just needs to stay the course, trust the team you have in place, and they are a team that should be competing for a Stanley Cup final appearance. New Jersey needs to find some scoring balance in the roster. Get Taylor Hall some help to balance out the scoring, add a top four defenseman, and maybe make some noise in the playoffs this year. To get back to the playoffs and make some noise, those are very realistic for New Jersey. The New York Islanders, obviously the big goal will be re-signing John Tavares, getting a goaltender, and adding some solid defensemen, and to help the fan base understand the process, they need to be competitive because you're playing in two different arenas at opposite ends of the city. It's going to be weird for the fan base this year. So to keep them invigorated, you need to be competitive, and I think the Islanders, short of making a playoff spot, would be a disappointment. The New York Rangers either commit to the rebuild or commit to the retool. That's got to be the goal this year. The potential for a rebuild means, possibly making some more unfavorable decisions, moving out veteran players, and getting more pieces back for the future. If you're committing to the retool, then, be able to install some instant talent, some big name players that can make an impact right now. Contending for a playoff spot isn't unrealistic for New York, but I think the fan base shouldn't be overly disappointed if they end up in the top 10 of the draft, because I think that those are very realistic possibilities either way. For Ottawa, they got to win back their fan base. This has been probably the most trying offseason for any fan base in NHL history for Ottawa. That's probably got to start with moving Mike Hoffman. Staying engaged with Erik Karlsson's people. They need to confirm probably before the draft if they're going to move Erik Karlsson or not and commit to that one way or the other. But winning is going to help, but I think, possibly contending for a playoff spot is probably a reach, but I mean, it's a possibility in the NHL. There's a lot of parity. Anything can happen. But also, by committing to the Erik Karlsson situation, that gives them the chance to forego the number 3 pick in this draft. If you think you're going to be that bad, then you need to commit that pick to Colorado so that you can keep your number 1 pick next year, which could possibly be better than the number 4 or 5 pick that they have this year. Philadelphia needs to find a goaltender to bridge the gap to get to Carter Hart. This is the Carter Hart waiting room for all the fans in Philadelphia. Obviously, the storied struggles of Philadelphia's goaltender situation have been well documented over the years. But if they find a solid goaltender that can bridge them to Carter Hart, bridge them to Carter Hart, they find a solid goaltender, win a series or two in the playoffs, that would be a successful year for Philadelphia. For the Pittsburgh Penguins, they need to solidify the defense. And I don't mean by going after like a top guy. They need to find a defensive defenseman to help solidify that position. And pretty much Pittsburgh's goal every year is just to win the Stanley Cup with the core that they have in place. Kessel, Malkin, Crosby, Letang. Now Hornquist is part of that core, signed long term. These are guys that have a shorter window to win, so they need to be in the Stanley Cup conversation. For San Jose, I think this needs to be a year that they go all in. They need to go out and be in the conversation for all the big free agent scorers, free agent centers, free agent defensemen. They got to be all in. I think this is the year to go all in and win a cup for Jumbo Joe Thornton because he is such a great player. He deserves it. And they need to go all in. San Jose, obviously they're still going to be working to replace the Paul Stastny trade that happened at the deadline. So adding some punch up front, getting back into the playoffs because St. Louis, they're a perennial playoff contender. So not making the playoffs for them this year was a huge disappointment. I think they need to get back into the playoffs. That's going to be the ultimate goal for St. Louis. Tampa Bay, again, this is another team that I think this is your window to go all in. With the core of defensemen that they have right now, their defensive core is a little bit older. You're going to be losing a lot of them via free agency next year. So go all in this year and spend all the way to the cap ceiling and win the Stanley Cup. This is one of those years where they can win the Stanley Cup. For Toronto, a lot of interesting contract situations for them, a lot of big-name free agents, but the other issue is that they have Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, all those guys. I think Nylander's even a restricted free agent this year. Those are the core part of your team that you need to get locked up for long-term to build for the future, and locking up that core is going to be important. With that, I think they're going to probably lose James Van Riemsdyk, so they're going to want to add a scoring winger to replace him. And I think anything short of at least a series win in the playoffs, possibly 2 series win in the playoffs, is going to be a disappointment for Toronto. So I'm thinking like Eastern Conference Finals is going to be like their probably their ceiling, but I think that's going to be their goal. Vancouver, passing the torch to the young guys. The Sedins are gone; they've retired. So it's time for guys like Bo Horvat, Brock Besser, guys like that to take over. And bringing these guys in, letting them experience the the spotlight for a bit. Getting them some help, some veteran help, isn't going to be a bad thing. But making sure that those guys know that they are the future of that franchise. And I think for Vancouver, obviously the goal is improvement. They want to see a jump in the standings. They're like bottom of their division. I think they finished second to last in the Pacific Conference. So you don't want to see improvement there. Contending for a playoff spot isn't too unrealistic. I think Jacob Markstrom would have to have a very stellar year for that to happen, but not entirely unrealistic. For the Vegas Golden Knights, they've got so much money and so much freedom to do whatever they want this offseason, and they have a team in place to be competitive and ready to go. So be players in free agency, but not too much of players in free agency. Add a guy or two, but don't kind of not do too much to disrupt the chemistry of that team. I think they obviously had amazing chemistry, so you don't want to break up that chemistry too much. Re-engage Ottawa for that Erik Karlsson conversation. Like I said earlier, I think they're going to be looking to move Karlsson, so re-engage that conversation. And for Vegas, I think the goal is winning the Stanley Cup. I think that's a realistic goal for them now. For Washington, re-sign Jarron Karlsson and get back to the Stanley Cup. I think everything else is, you can kind of work around all the other free agents and moves that they may need to make, but John Karlsson, that's a guy that you just don't replace very easily, especially not with the defensive market being what it is right now. So they need to re-sign John Karlsson, and repeating as Stanley Cup champions, that's going to be the Washington goal, or the Washington dream in my eyes. For Winnipeg, re-signing Paul Stastny, obviously the big goal of the offseason is to re-sign Paul Stastny and go one more round deep, get in that cup final, and win a Stanley Cup. I personally would love to see it. There is no other Canadian franchise I want to see break the 25-year streak. I want to see Winnipeg do it. I love Blake Wheeler, love their roster, love everything they have in place, and I think winning the Stanley Cup is obviously the goal for Winnipeg, but not only the goal, it is a very realistic, attainable goal for Winnipeg. So that's my 31 thoughts on this. Let me know in the comments below, what are realistic goals for your teams, and what teams may have higher than most expectations, and what teams do you think will underperform expectations next year? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow me on all the social media listed below. And until next time, have a good day.